ComHit.
All right, we're going to start getting into health research. Going to keep the excitement coming at Space Health Nexus. Our next panel is on accelerating discoveries in space, medical treatments, and precision medicine. Dr. Stuart Harris is joining us again for this to discuss the role of AI in health research and advancements in precision medicine. We're also welcoming Health and Safety Innovation Lead Research Engineer Isabel Erickson from Aptima, Jeremy Wain Hirschberg from the Christopher Mason Lab at Weill Cornell Medicine. And Chris, do you want to go ahead and run the video, and then I'll introduce Yvette.
Hi, I'm Chris Mason, Professor of Genomics, Physiology, and Biophysics here at Weill Cornell Medicine. And sad I couldn't be there today in person, but I think you've heard a bit about some of the biobank work and some of the space molecular biology and omics work that's been happening in our lab and with many collaborators around the world. And I really want to just say congratulations to the entire audience, speakers, the entire organizers of the meeting. Looks like it's been great. And also to implore everyone to think and dream big. This is the beginning of what we say is the second space age, quite quantifiably, an order of magnitude more launches, more missions, more ambitious missions happening than ever before. This is really our time to shine as a community of scientists, explorers, engineers, ethicists, clinicians, everyone coming together to think about how do we live and work and thrive in space. So this, everything from medical treatments to precision medicine to the technology for diagnostics to synthetic biology, all of these tools are bubbling up in our lab and other labs and around the world. So it's really an extraordinary time, and we'll need all of you to help contribute to the data, the methods to basically build new models that can have predictive medicine, precision medicine on Earth, as we've done, of course, but now it's time to bring these same tools that we use at our hospital here and bring them to the medical facilities and precision medicine that's going to be on the moon, Mars, and everywhere else that we go. So again, really enjoy the conference, dream big, and also think about what we could do over the next 10 years, 100 years, the next 500 years, as I like to say sometimes. So really, really dream big. It's your birthright as a human being and as a sentient species that can dream big to do so. So enjoy, dream big, and think about precision medicine everywhere we go. Thanks.
Okay. It's from Chris Mason at the Christopher Mason Lab. So moderating this panel is a trailblazer in space medicine and bioastronautics, driving innovation that bridges health solutions on Earth and in space. So please welcome the dazzling Yvette Gonzalez as a visiting researcher at the University of Plymouth Faculty of Health in the UK. She collaborates with the Space Omics and Medical Atlas team and contributes to groundbreaking open science data repository initiatives. In 2023, she served as the research lead and crew for the first ever space research caving analog in Portugal, supporting transformative human health experiments for the University of Plymouth's Dental School, their Center of Eye Care Excellence, and Brain Research and Imaging Center. Her investigations span annual parabolic flight campaigns and key neuroscience and say it, Yvette. Ophthalmological, I know the word, but not today. Experiments for spaceflight missions like Axiom 2, Polaris Dawn, and Galactic 5. So you're going to find that Yvette, she has the background to go with her vibrant personality and groundbreaking work. So come inspire people to turn their dreams into action. Please welcome Yvette Gonzalez.
Hi. I'm way shorter. I'm going to invite the panel to go ahead and come and take your seats. Stuart, is Stuart on the other side? Yeah. Hi, everyone. First, thank you, Kendra, the ComHit team, and Chris and the team that have been taking care of us. I was just commenting that it's been such a calm, smooth experience so far, because I think we forget that we're not coming together for the conference, for a framework of symposium. It's that we're here and we have this sacred moment together, and that of all places you could be on this planet, you're sitting here with these other incredible humans and you have this opportunity to learn. So I thank Kendra and the team for bringing us together, for having these conversations, and for making all of this relevant. So thank you so much for that, and for having me. I don't know where Stanley went. Is Stanley still here? Okay, well, I took up his challenge. I'm just going to read the poem for him, so it's on record. He said, write a poem for the month, and he inspired me. So it's called We Are Familiar. We are magic when we are one. On we glow to outshine the sun. That's it. He was great. So this one about space discoveries is exciting because whether you're a novice, an enthusiast, or whether you've been following any of these careers here or each other and space and the narratives online, space inspires. And today, this conversation and these individuals, they inspire me. You'll get to learn more about them now. And so Stuart, we've already introduced, so I won't repeat your bio, but welcome back up to the stage. Isabel is literally driving innovation for the intersection of technology and humanity, which is really exciting with the biomonitor work that she presented yesterday. And her focus on human-centered design comes from 5 years in AI systems, physiological signals, and biomechanics. And she spearheaded projects managing more than $5 million in DoD and commercial research funding, which is that's a lot. Her groundbreaking work includes developing wearable systems, as we saw yesterday, for heat stress monitoring and non-contact vital monitoring systems for senior living, but I can tell you this is really important off Earth. Her experience includes 3 years in design control for FDA-regulated systems at Medtronic and GE Healthcare, and ensuring the highest standards of safety and effectiveness. She holds an advanced degree in industrial and biomedical engineering from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Welcome, Isabel. That's a lot of accomplishment, yes. And Jeremy, who we're on a team together, but we've never met until this moment, so in person. So welcome, Jeremy. Jeremy Wain Hirschberg serves as a research specialist in the Christopher Mason Lab, as you saw earlier, at Cornell Medicine. He is also founder and director of operations for the Cornell Aerospace Medicine Biobank. And he's a key contributor to the Space Omics Medical Atlas, which is also known as SOMA. Jeremy's expertise spans next-generation sequencing, in vitro diagnostics development, and space medicine research. He has a master's in space studies from the International Space University. He has personally overseen and standardized the collection, processing and storage of over 15,000 biospecimens across 8 space missions. His work is pivotal in making space mission biosamples more accessible while advancing multi-omic research to foster innovation in the growing field of space medicine. So let's give him applause. Okay, this is quite a phenomenal panel. Thank you all for being here. We're going to start with each of you giving us 5 minutes about your work and how you define it. So we'll start with Isabel, then Jeremy, and Stuart. So Isabel, if you will.
Awesome. Thanks. Yeah, thanks again for having me here. So I'm going to talk about a little bit something different than what I've been talking about before. So currently working on some work with DARPA and ARPA-H on making a AI-powered assistant for research. And something that really cool about what we're doing there is we're using a new approach to AI, which is like agentic AI, and using a combination of different AIs that are better or best at very specific things. So we have a combination of a retrieval agent that is able to take in all different types of research. So you have the space research, maybe you're looking at like the omics research you guys do, and maybe you yourself are a clinician, so you have a different type of background. And so we also have an AI that can do reasoning on that and translate it back to you so that you can understand research from a different field in your own research language. So we're hoping that this type of research can support and bring new innovations. So I'll bring that to this discussion today.
Thank you so much. Jeremy?
Hi, everybody. Thanks for the invitation, Kendra, and the opportunity to be here. I've really enjoyed getting to meet everybody and learn about your guys' perspective and the challenges you guys are facing. Yeah, my name is Jeremy. I work in the Christopher Mason Lab at Weill Cornell Medicine. That was my boss up on the big screen. I kind of wear two hats in the role that I have in the lab. One is the director of operations for the Cornell Aerospace Medicine Biobank. And what that entails is we have agreements with commercial space companies like SpaceX, Blue Origin, Axiom Space, and they graciously allow us to collect samples from their crews prior to the mission, during flight if we can, though that comes with additional challenges, immediately after returning, and then longitudinally afterwards. And that's as many different biospecimens as they'll allow us to take or that they're willing to take, so that includes blood, urine, stool, hair. We've gotten moles from people. Sometimes for some missions, they'll only say, like, we're only willing to give you urine. Sometimes we'll get the whole slate. And then we process those samples and catalog and store them into a biobank facility. And then other research groups can make a request for a particular sample site, and we're able to sample type. And so we're able to then distribute those samples and increase the accessibility of spaceflight samples to other groups. And then the other hat that I wear is as a researcher myself. So I would be one of the individuals who receives one of those sample sets and conducts actual research on that. And so my specialty is in genomics, looking at the DNA, but our lab also plays around in a number of different areas that I get to be exposed to as well.
Very cool, thank you. And Stuart.
Hello again, Stuart Harris. I guess I identify as an emergency physician. That's what drives most of what I do, that and a father. In the work we're doing, I think that applies here is, as we built out the Space Medicine Fellowship to follow on the Wilderness Medicine Fellowship, is looking at how the environment crafts our health and how essential human health is on the environment that sustains it. I think as far as the precision medicine and treatments, as we start looking and working closely with some of our commercial space partners, the opportunities to learn about life on Earth and the ability to use space as an extraordinary technological and care accelerator. So the things that we learn even in low Earth orbit that have direct application to Earth are pretty extraordinary, and for better or for worse, people are oftentimes interested in funding things that happen in space that if they happened in East Boston or rural Virginia, where I'm from, they wouldn't care about, but they can be directly applied. So we're working closely with our colleagues at MIT Aero-Astro, with a number of mitochondrial and other omics researchers at the Broad Institute, the Weill Center for Biologically Inspired Engineering, and other places, to look at how changes in the local environment, whether it's lack of gravity, changes in oxygen pressure, changes in oxygen concentration, and on down the line, what can we learn from that experience in what's now a very small population? You need to think that roughly as many people summited Everest last year as have ever been into space. So what we don't know is almost everything. The vast majority of discovery to come is to come. I think we sometimes get a little comfortable in thinking that, oh, you know, we're pretty clever and we know stuff. Like, we don't know, a word my mother wouldn't let me say, we don't know stuff. So it's how can we use extreme environments, both terrestrial and space, to better understand basic human physiology, and then to apply that in a precision manner to individuals. We're working closely with MIT again on looking at, you know, how if we're going to Mars, how can we use AI and other tools to overcome the communications latency for people who might be very, very smart but not necessarily medically savvy. So how can we teach devices to recognize when they're not doing well, to help them in that regard, and then to diagnose and treat them in real time with humans kind of removed from the process.
Very nice, thank you so much. And as a show of hands, how many of you work in space medicine? Back there? Okay, so that's interesting. And I ask that because there's also what is the context for how we integrate the work that we're doing, what you all are doing, and then how do we bridge applications. And so that's what this is about. So space discoveries are not just for the sake of people who are flying off Earth, but how do we take that innovation, what they're doing in the labs, and how do we actually apply it on Earth? So I'm going to start with a question because we saw a lot yesterday about technology, about AI, even Isabel, when you were presenting your technology and advancements. The question is, in the context of advancing quickly, how is artificial intelligence, data repositories, open data systems where we share open science, and actually all of you have access to the work that Jeremy is doing, how do these accelerate the pace of medical discovery for space exploration first? So how are these tools being used in space and on Earth, and what potential do they have for transforming life on Earth? So I'll start with Jeremy.
Yeah, sure. I think it's certainly like the golden age of data sharing at this point, where, you know, in terms of increasing accessibility to samples, that's one thing, but we're also increasing the accessibility of the data that we generate. And within the biobank, part of the initiative for creating that was actually, you know, taking a play out of classic Earth medicine's playbook, in that biobanks have expedited a lot of medical research here on Earth. And a big reason for that, and a lot of power, comes from pairing the biobank samples with an open data repository. Because when we do research on these data, on these sample sets, we'll publish that data to this repository, and someone might interact with that data and say, oh, this is really interesting, I wish they would have done this type of assay on these samples. And they can come to us, and we have copies of those samples, aliquots of those samples. And so then we can distribute it to them, they publish that data set, that's also open source, and it just creates this perpetual feedback loop of good science. And at the same time, the biobank allows us to decrease confounds, standardize different processes. And so all of that together starts to create a collaborative research ecosystem that just catalyzes our ability to understand from these data sets.
And I have to say, we'll share afterwards some of the access to being part of and getting access to this open science and the data repositories, because what you see often, what you just said, another scientist or medical professional will see the same data and ask a very different research question. And that is kind of the point, right, that we keep asking.
Yeah, definitely. And another aspect of it is some of these data sets are absolutely massive. And by creating these data repositories, it makes it more accessible to people who might not have the infrastructure to shuttle terabytes of data on and off of a server.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much. Stuart, would you like to take a stab at the question?
I don't know. I think he's done such a beautiful job. I think it's more of the same, but I think the thing that I find particularly interesting and maybe not spoken to is the sense that while we have vast amounts of data, our ability to, you can think of, you know, the internet without Google, you'd be not in a very good place, but our ability to query the data, to compare the data, to look at, you know, this is the question I have. So I'm interested in high altitude physiology and what happens when the singular organ of the human, the brain, is immediately impacted by low oxygen states, kind of the universal life threat. And looking at that, working with our friends on mitochondrial disorders and other things, just the ability we have to look with just fantastic detail with individuals and then query it against a larger whole. It's a fantastic time to be curious and to be in medicine. And so I think sometimes people are off-put by the sense of, oh, you know, it's big and complex, but at some level, it's extraordinarily inviting time because we can ask really thoughtful questions and suddenly, you know, the whole universe of data are open to us. So it's exciting.
Absolutely. And for AI, the question for you, I think is even more relevant because of what you showed us yesterday. But how is that, do you think, also transforming life on Earth with your work?
Yeah, so thanks for asking. So I feel like I have a totally different experience and things to say than the rest of the panel. I've also done some research on like trust in AI and thinking about like the Hera missions is where they have people that live in these micro environments that are basically like how it would be on Mars. And I think like another person said earlier today that you have like a 20-minute communication delay, so we can't really be relying on that for if there's an emergency happen. And so an AI is something that could support you in those situations. And I think this, it's forced us to think more about like trust in AI and how AI works with people. And I think that's a really interesting area because as you can see, like Teslas and other types of ways that AI is like really being in control in some situations and it can cause harm. And so thinking about how can we build our AI systems where it creates like kind of that center of trust so you're not overly trusting something, but you're also not under trusting it. And so you're right, you're making a trust calibration. And so being able to create systems that allow people to also think on their own and know when AI might be wrong or when to rely on AI. I think that's a really important area that space is helping us to do more research on. And I think this is also very relevant to the health space. When maybe a clinician, you can't ask a clinician for support, you need to think about what the AI is saying and know if you can trust it. So I think it's a cool area.
I was just going to say, in having that ability, I've talked to a number of astronauts about this in particular, and while automation of systems is almost inevitably, when it's really well done, an improvement in safety, to have that ability to keep the human in the loop, and that's part of its trust, and part of its recent experiences we've had in orbit, where having the ability to put a human being in control of a failing system made the difference between success and not. So I think there's something, I'm enough of a humanist that the sense of keeping the human in the loop is absolutely critical, and we have to have that ability to recognize, wait a second, we're seeing things, the human brain is a prediction organ, and that's kind of what we do, is we've evolved to look ahead and say, you know, what's a hazard? And so all of our AI is kind of looking at retrospective data, where the ability to prospectively to look forward, that's a human thing that, you know, AI is not going to become an emergency physician anytime soon. There are too many moving pieces. If you're a radiologist, you're looking at images that can be reduced to, you know, ones and zeros, binary data, you know, you're in deep trouble as far as having a profession. Where if you're a storyteller, which is what a lot of clinicians who are at the bedside are, that's a fantastically complex problem for large language models and others to approach. But so keeping, I guess, the awareness of how the human fits into AI in that interaction is part of that building of trust.
Oh, that's a fascinating. Did you want to reply to him? You were kind of...
Oh yeah, I'd just say I completely agree with that.
Okay. So I have to say, I think Kendra could do a whole other Nexus on AI alone, right? The conversation about trust, ethics, and how we apply it. She's like, oh yeah, you're on. But also, we probably drop very casually that we work with astronauts, right? Like, because we have access to them. Like I train astronauts, Jeremy and Stuart work with astronauts, and I know Isabel will because I'm roping her in. And I have to say, it is a privilege, right, to be able to understand how the human body physiologically does adapt to these scenarios, how you prepare for them. And one thing I've heard through the space health community and the medical doctors at NASA, at ESA, is it's not even about countermeasures. It's not just about how do we answer the research questions for mitigation. Prevention is our ultimate goal, on Earth and off Earth. So I look at what unique medical challenges that we're facing now, during space missions especially, and in other extreme environments. We talked about these extreme analogous environments to space. How have they spurred advancements in precision medicine? And how might these discoveries lead to more effective, individualized treatment on Earth? And so I'll start with Stuart.
I mean, again, I'll keep going back to the mountains because that's my happy place. But looking at how individualized and extraordinarily specific scientific observations apply directly to human health. So on Monday, I had a friend who works for one of the significant commercial space groups who was in, and I was giving him a tour of different labs, and one of the people we visited a guy named Vamsi Mutha, who's smarter than pretty much the entirety of Harvard Medical School put together, but very gentle, gracious soul, and he's a mitochondrial expert. And a number of years ago, he was looking at mitochondrial disease. So mitochondria are the little powerhouses in each of our cells that allow us to do what we do, and without them, we die very quickly. And if they're impaired, so there's certain diseases that if you are born with them, the failing of the mitochondria can very rapidly lead to lack of vision, lack of breathing, lack of life. And they did some studies looking in mice how low oxygen states, kind of the analogy I use is if you've got a failing wood stove, which you can think of a mitochondria as kind of, it takes substrate and puts it together with oxygen and provides energy. You know, you blow on the fire and you hope it comes to life. And that's what most care had been up until that point. But they found in this mouse model of mitochondrial disease that low oxygen states not only prevented the disease, in many cases they reversed. And these are devastating human diseases that show up in my ED. And they followed the data, and they're very rapidly finding that changes in oxygen concentration, especially for some particular diseases, and some of them with wide application, can be life-saving. And it's just completely counterintuitive to the way medicine was practiced for the prior 2,000 years. So it's things like that where you can get detailed, they seem precise and unique to this fairly rare patient population, but they ultimately have broad application. That, you know, right now the idea that science is being divorced from funding under somewhat dubious circumstances is just not in the human interest. I don't care what party you belong in, who you voted for. It's like these are universal human goods. Being curious, figuring out how to help people, these are human goods. And they're the ability to kind of lean into that and to recognize, hey man, there have been bad communication all around. Not saying that's not the case, but attacking science is just not the way to go about solving problems.
Absolutely, and right now, current human health in space is about survival and depending on each other in space. So, Jeremy, did you want to answer that question?
Yeah, sure. So I'll say that, before we even get to medicine and countermeasures, our ability to even just understand what's going on in the body is limited by the quality of the samples that we get into the lab. And so I would say that the biggest challenge that we face in the work we do is cold chain and sample stabilization. So, just because we've gotten samples doesn't mean that they're of quality. And so, and if they are of quality, even if they were handled slightly differently, that can totally impact your ability to draw conclusions from that. So when we do these collections for the missions that we work on, we actually need to find a local lab at the location where the astronauts are and work out of their space in order to have proximity to where we're collecting the samples and process them in a standardized, quick, and effective manner. So when we do missions out of Cape Canaveral here, we have collaborators at Emory-Riddle, Dr. Amber Paul and Dr. Cassandra Giron, who are here, who just let us crash their space for sometimes as long as a week, and we have to ship in a bunch of materials and then ship all the samples back to our lab on dry ice. And sometimes for these missions, they're launching out of here in Florida, and then 3 days later they're landing in LA, and then a day after that they have to go to Johnson and Houston, and we're doing a collection in each of those locations. And so that's definitely the biggest challenge we're facing, and there's some really promising approaches to how we can go about stabilizing samples in the situation where they're collected. So 10x Genomics has proposed a protocol out there for stabilizing cells immediately after you draw blood from someone. And they're not quite at the quality that you get if you actually are in a position to process a fresh sample. But those types of things are going to be what really enable us to start doing better science on what's going on in remote locations or in space. Because some of these blood tubes we're supposed to process within 2 hours of collecting, and if you're in orbit, there's no way that sample's hitting the lab in time. And so we capture that within the metadata that we have and try to, count it as a variable, but that's really just not ideal samples. And to steal a term from programming, like garbage in, garbage out. If your samples aren't good, there's no way you can glean good conclusions from it.
Yeah, I think one of the conversations in the past few weeks about data is exquisite data and how close are we to getting more precise data and good quality data to use, because it's just as important as having access to it. And Isabel, did you want to make a comment on the challenges for space missions, or?
I think they covered it pretty well.
Okay,
but
all right, everything
yeah.
to make sure I get a fair, equal opportunity. So Jeremy, I do have a question specifically for you. A lot of the work you do deals with multi-omics research, which is what Chris Mason was talking about on screen. And can you explain what that research is, and then highlight findings that will have applications on Earth?
Yeah, sure. So I'll take it back to some cell biology, but I'll keep it pretty basic. So within any cell of an organism, there's a bunch of DNA. And that DNA is copied exactly the same in every cell. And if you're studying that, we call that genomics. You're studying the genome. And then part of cell functionality is that your genome will be coded into RNA through a process called transcription. And so if you're studying RNA, we call that the transcriptome. You're doing transcriptomics. And then RNA goes on to make proteins. If you're studying those proteins, that's proteomics. And then proteins go about the body doing different things, and we can study metabolites from those reactions. That's your metabolome. And so those are some of the many different omes that are studied. And so the idea is each of these has been its own kind of area of study, and you have different tools that you would use to probe into these different aspects of biology. But fundamentally, they're all layers that are interconnected. And so the idea of multi-omics is moving forward into a new perspective where we're taking all of these data sets and trying to correlate them to one another and try to glean then bigger picture conclusions about entire system functionality. So that's fundamentally the big picture of multi-omics. And I'll say that, we're still in kind of the early days of multi-omics. And like Stuart was saying, that frankly the sample sizes are pretty small with what we're working with as of now. And so I always try to be a bit cautious in terms of drawing large conclusions, but I think ultimately we're building the data set that eventually is going to result in some really large findings on the system level. And those findings are not specific to space necessarily. This is about understanding physiology and the mechanisms by which the body works. And that entirely applies to Earth as well. So Stuart brought up earlier that a gunshot wound might be an extreme case of hypoxia. You could view it that way. There's a lot of talk in the field recently that space medicine is a model for aging studies, because we see a lot of muscle atrophy, cardiovascular decline, bone density loss, which are all aspects of aging population as well. And so if we can underpin the mechanisms that drive those metabolisms, like exactly what's the cellular function that's breaking down your bone because you're not using it, we can glean a whole bunch more about how the body functions, and then comes into countermeasures. Where do we step in? And so we've identified some more specific findings right now, but again, they're just kind of a stepping stone to where that big impact is. But just as an example, we've identified certain biomarkers that seem to be related to cardiovascular decline that we see for long-term spaceflight. And those biomarkers specifically could be targets for drug intervention or different types of therapies. And so that is not just isolated to a space environment or a remote environment. That's potentially applicable in any environment.
Did you want to comment?
Yeah, no, I'm just good. Jeremy, yes. No, that's just so spot on. And again, it's that sense of human beings are a bespoke solution to the exact environmental conditions we face. And so the ability of getting off planet to better understand how we respond is just hugely applicable. And it's that sense of muscle loss, of bone loss, of ability to deal with fluid shifts. Those are just three very basic problems that, on Monday night we're in my ED. Anybody who's, even a young person who's bedbound for a week or more, has substantial changes that take a very long time just to get back to baseline. And as we get older, have fewer mitochondria, fewer resources, it's just the process of being bedbound that ultimately leads to your death, or at least serious functional decline to the point you can't be an independent human being and do what you want to do. And what we can learn in space by even a week, 2, 3 of exposure has just huge and universal application on Earth. So again, I don't want to be cynical, but you don't have to care about space at all. You know, if you've got a mother, a father, a brother, or sister who may be incapacitated at some point, and if any of us are lucky, we'll be in that group. We'll get old enough. But what we stand to learn by going to space has universal terrestrial impact. So it's not about sending pretty people or rich people, or even just the sense of exploration, which I think is noble and curious and we should be pursuing just as a human being. But it's ultimately, what does this stand to help us with on Earth? That's a driving force on why I'm spending my time in this.
You know, it's in a lot of the astronauts that are in our human health research are giving samples to these research studies, but then they're also wearing harnesses and they have multimodal equipment that are checking their brain health, their eye health, their microbiome, and all their vitals and their biometrics. So when I see Isabel's, what do you call it, equipment? What is the pad called?
The contactless sensors?
Yes. I told her what's interesting is that that would be so useful, and that's a nice application on Earth of what we tend to put and strap onto a human body when they're in space in different ways. You know, there's analog ways, and then there's these new straps. So you're an exact and precise example of how that technology is now useful for remedying aging and people with chronic illnesses, and we can monitor that on Earth, because it does matter how we apply that. I also think about, everyone here have canned food in their cupboard? Like canned food in your kitchen? I mean, we would still be suffering from botulism if space had not discovered that astronauts needed to eat and their microbiome needed to be safe in space. You know, and Pillsbury worked with NASA in the 60s and 70s to make sure that we didn't die in space and that we didn't die on Earth after eating canned food. So the last question I have here, what are some of the most promising new medical discoveries? I mean, you all have access to a lot of information in your circles and your networks and your experiences, but what are the most promising new medical discoveries made during space exploration, and how can these breakthroughs impact health and wellness for us on Earth? I'll start with Isabel.
Awesome. Well, you kind of stole my thunder a little bit, but
Your words.
it's okay. But yeah, I was just, I did a little bit of searching before I came, and I found that remote patient monitoring started in the 60s and 70s, space research. And I think it's kind of crazy to think about because we weren't really thinking a lot about that before COVID. And I think I was kind of thinking about what you guys were just saying about, you know, the new research coming out, and space like forces us to make big leaps in innovation. And like people in the civilian world may not even dream of certain solutions because they couldn't even think it was, the beginning it was even possible. But seeing some of these new innovations, or like battery technologies, or like the health sensing, and then moving that to being contactless and monitoring people like in rural areas, all of that allows like visionaries and people to think about new ways that were not even possible before. So I think that's an important way to think about it as well.
Thank you. Jeremy?
So I think what's important to note is that we are at the beginning of the second space age. And so I think a lot of the like really big, exciting, drop the mic kind of discoveries are yet to come. But the things that are getting me excited are the little hints that there's something worth pursuing. And so, you know, stuff like our lab has been studying a protein produced by tardigrades, which is a little microorganism. Sometimes they're called water bears. And they've been studied in space environments. They actually can survive the vacuum of space. And we've identified certain pathways within their biology that protect against radiation. And so that in and of itself is not a discovery for really that is applicable to us, but as we continue to study that, we're trying to find ways to basically transfect the gene that produces that protein into human cells. So if you know someone's going to go into a high radiation environment like space, or even commercial pilots experience much higher doses of radiation than an average person, you could theoretically have a genetic therapy to help your body produce that protein, and then you'd be more protected from the radiation you're experiencing. And I think that there's a handful of those promising routes that we're going to be able to go down that aren't quite there yet, but theoretically could be extremely transformative to the way that we take on these other environments. I think the more tangible one in the present that maybe is the exciting thing to me is just the miniaturization of technology and the adaptation of methodologies for these unique environments. And so my favorite example of this that maybe is a bit cliche is you take something like the Human Genome Project, which took 15 years, billions of dollars, 25 institutions using instruments the size of refrigerators. And now I can sequence an entire human genome in 3 days using this and a laptop for about $1,000. And in 2016, almost 10 years ago now, I've been using this example for a little bit, Kate Rubins, who's an astronaut, Dr. Rubins sequenced a DNA sample on station in space. And so now that's almost 10 years ago. There's other technologies that are coming along in that regard. And I think the more and more we're able to do the work in situ, in the actual setting, the more advancements we're going to really see.
Wow. Thank you for that blast from the past. And Stuart.
I think we've touched on almost everything that but I think the ability to expand, looking around the room, I don't know, a couple hundred people here, and just imagine if we were trying to describe the totality of health based on, a couple hundred people. I don't think there are many malaria cases in here, which is one of the primary killers on the planet. And so we have such a small sample size right now of people who've actually been to space, and that is very rapidly changing. There's going to be a mass of humanity who will be exposed to these conditions. So just as Jeremy was talking about, an N when we talk about sample size, our sample size is getting ready to explode. And that's just going to be so helpful to figuring out what we need to follow. And right now, kind of like the mitochondrial expert I talked about, he paid attention to the data. It's like the mice, it's like, well, this makes no sense. It's the opposite of what we were expecting. And so to come into things with a beginner's mind and openness to following the data, and I think that's what's most interesting and most exciting, is we're going to find out things that we think we know now, and it's like, man, we didn't know anything, And so I think that's a really cool aspect of this work, and it's happening right now. And it's going to only accelerate.
I have to agree that every time we discover an answer to a question, there's 10 more questions. And then we realize how much we just don't know and yet, that we just don't know yet. Well, I want to thank you all, but I do want to say we're going to close with a video from another colleague. So part of the last two space flights, including Polaris Dawn, Axiom 2, and the one who just landed 2 weeks ago, Fram 2. Have you all heard of Fram 2? Yeah? Okay. So the exciting thing is that a colleague was leading the research, especially on hemoglobin. And they couldn't be here because they are actually having a conference on that in Malta. But he sent us a message because that was the first, if you don't know, the first human orbit around the poles, which has extremely higher amounts of exposure to radiation, had never been attempted before for obvious reasons. And they went through a lot to get permission for that flight. If I'm not mistaken, there was Maltese, German, Norwegian, and what was the fourth? There were 4 different nationalities. but it was one of these kind of science-altering experiences, and so we're really excited to learn from that. We're waiting for the results to come back. The data has been collected, and I think they're celebrating that this is a new movement forward for looking at innovation. So the final message we'll leave you with is from Joseph Borg, who was the PI and lead on that team out of Malta. So I don't know if you have the video.
Hello, Yvette, and good evening or good afternoon. I'm Joseph Borg, and of course, whilst I'm sad not to be there with you today in the States, today we have our own conference here in Malta about Science Without Borders. So I would like to send all my wishes to you there at your conference. So yes, so thank you for the small invite and also to give this small feature about our work here in Malta. So indeed, the work that we do, whether it is related to human skin tissue microbiome research or whether it is on human blood research, the idea is that we use space for Earth applications in order to conduct our research, and the results and the data sets that we get back from space are applied back here to Earth. So one or two very important areas of research that we do includes blood omics, whereby we take blood samples from human astronauts, and these included past research with SpaceX and Inspiration 4, Polaris Dawn, and most recently in FRAM2. We take blood before launch, astronauts take blood in flight, and we also take blood samples after they return back to Earth. And these blood samples are processed in our labs in the States and in Malta in order to look at globin gene switching, regulation, and control. The idea is that the important insights and key genes that emerge from this research can be of potential use or benefit and used for therapeutic purposes in thalassemia, sickle cell anemia, and related hemoglobin disorders. That's one main area of research. And when it comes to human skin tissue microbiomes, we also look at the effects of spaceflight, microgravity, and radiation on bacteria, on microbiomes, and how these change, adapt, and what we can learn from them in order to combat better these bacteria for antimicrobial resistance here on Earth. So with these small snippets about the work that we do on bacteria and blood and related cell biology, I send my wishes back to you, and I hope for a successful event and to meet at some point in the future. Thank you and good luck.
So I want to thank our panel, and please, I take this opportunity. We're here in person. I mean, we don't even get to meet in person all the time. Meet with Stuart and Jeremy, Isabel. Have a conversation about how maybe your work is relevant to what they're doing. If you're not working in the space, please approach any of us and see how you can be involved. It is not a place of gatekeeping. There's open doors for everyone's work, applying your work, and we'd be excited to expand how we're doing that. Thank you so much for sharing your stories today, and thank you for what you're doing for humanity.